report exposes how powerful business interests influence those in charge of developing federal dietary guidelines. Now, this report was published by a nonprofit called US Right to Know. And if you think there's corruption in government and only government, meaning members of Congress, you'll be mistaken, because it turns out there's a lot of corruption when it comes to federal food guidelines as well. So this report focused on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, which is a panel of food and nutrition experts who make recommendations for updating the US government's official dietary advice. Now, the US Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services jointly revise those dietary guidelines every 5 years. Like, I've always wondered, how is it that the diet, like the USDA guidelines, like encourage you to eat a bunch of like carbs, right? Like carbs, which of course get processed as sugar in your body, not necessarily so good for you, although we do need some portion of carbs. Anyway, I got my answer with this report. The nonprofit compiled publicly available data from the last 5 years about each of the 20 DGAC members and their ties to various industries, which serve as a conflict of interest, right? Now, 9 out of the 20 members of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee have conflicts of interest with food, pharmaceutical, or weight loss companies or industry groups with a stake in the outcome of the guidelines. An additional 4 members had possible conflicts of interest. Those relationships included research funding from infant formula companies, the US Egg Nutrition Center, and the California Walnut Commission, paid consulting positions with companies that manufacture weight loss drugs, and advisory board roles at Weight Watchers and the National Dairy Council. And look, the corruption is real bad when you look at specific numbers. So I want to give you a specific example that was noted in this report. One committee member, for example, received a $240,000 grant from Eli Lilly, one of the top insulin manufacturers, to research better ways for diabetes patients to manage their blood sugar through their diets. Seems like a conflict of interest. Seems like a little bit of a problem. I mean, we did a story recently about how influencers get paid to promote all sorts of unhealthy garbage without really disclosing that it's like a sponsored post. So you've got like the issues there in social media, but then you also have the corruption infiltrating the federal government and the very people, the very board members who make up these guidelines to begin with. And the real question is, are we getting accurate information about what is and is not healthy for us? Especially at a time when like obesity rates continue to grow, Americans are dealing with real health concerns as a result of that. Kate, you produced this story. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think this is an issue that a lot of people, including myself, have been trying to amplify for a long time, not because we want to sow distrust, but because we actually want government institutions to have integrity and like follow the best science that's out there. And that's not to say that they never do that. I don't think everyone in the federal bureaucracy is like doing the bidding of the industry, but just like we say, it's ridiculous to claim that campaign contributions don't affect lawmakers. I think it's ridiculous to say that there's no possible way that industry paying for research or giving people paid consulting jobs isn't gonna somehow affect their analysis and what they end up putting out there for the public. And even if it's around the edges, it's unacceptable. Like they might think they're not doing anything wrong. I doubt that they're taking exact talking points from the industry and putting it in their guidelines, but any appearance of corruption, I think, is bad. And there's some parts of the industry that are honestly more powerful than others. So like historically, the meat and dairy industries have had a ton of power, and the corn and soy and huge crops like that. And a lot of nutritionists have spoken out and said, we've been pressured to say, eat more meat, or don't say eat less meat, et cetera, stuff like that, because they get pressure from the industry. And I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah, it is a huge problem. And part of the problem is that, these board members need funding to do the research they want to do. And so they seek that funding from private industry. And there is, in my opinion, a solution to that. So Christopher Gardner, who's a professor of medicine at Stanford University and also a current member of the Dietary Guidelines Committee, said it would be difficult to find enough nutrition experts for the 20-member committee who had not taken any money from the industry, precisely because of the way the research is funded. And so he says, like federal funding for nutrition research is limited, he said, and many researchers accept industry grants for research studies so they can keep their jobs in academia. We have to publish or perish, Dr. Gardner said. So considering the fact that this is a federal government effort, the federal government should fund the research. Like it shouldn't be that complicated, you know? And Taylor, you like to follow some of the health related content out there. I found out about that influencer who was eating raw meat all the time. What was the name of that guy?
Liver King.
The Liver King,
oh,
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have the pleasure of knowing the existence of Liver King if it weren't for you. I really enjoyed covering that story. But you've been irritated by this trend as well, right? Like just inaccurate information getting to the masses, either through social media or in this case, the federal government, as a result of, private industry funding these efforts.
100%. I mean, it's infuriating. It's really scary.
Yeah.
I mean, because I don't know where to turn. And I think people feel that. Like, Kate, to your point, like, we're not trying to, sow distrust or what have you, but these are the facts and we're reporting on them, and they do sow distrust because when you have these conflicts of interest, it is really concerning. And I'm sure there are, I'm sure there's some well-meaning academics who are like, I literally don't know where else to get money if it's not from these corporations. So there's a deeper problem here where the funding is coming from that has to be fixed, because otherwise, I just don't know who to trust.
Who to trust, exactly.
Where do I go?
And there's so much conflicting information out there. Like I think a good example is eggs. Like I know that's a weird thing to bring up, but seriously. So eggs are bad for you, it'll increase your cholesterol. No, eggs are good for you. They do not increase cholesterol. Same thing kind of happened with coffee for a while or red wine, and it's like, I don't, okay, I'm just gonna eat everything in moderation because I don't know what to believe, right? But the confusion that it sows in society is real. And so when we have these discussions about the obesity epidemic, it's really important to understand that it's multifaceted. I think the causes are multifaceted. People are not getting accurate information. Some people live in parts of the country where they don't have access to actual grocery stores, the food desert, so they rely on, the corner store that doesn't have the healthiest options available for them. There are people who have to take certain prescription drugs that increase, their weight. There's all sorts of issues at play. And whenever we have these discussions about what to do about obesity or people who are overweight in the country, how can we get them healthier? I think you need a multi-pronged approach. And one of the ways the federal government can actually pull its weight and do something is, maybe allocating the research money for these researchers so they're not corrupted by private industry funding their research instead. And by the way, I want to say one other thing. I think this is an important quote to get to because oftentimes when we talk about these types of corruption related stories, there's this feel that all parties know what they're doing, like they're aware of the corruption, but a lot of times it's subconscious. Like the influence of that money can be subconscious. So I want to read a comment from Marion Nessel, who's a professor of nutrition, food studies, and public health at NYU. And she says the following. No, I'm sorry, this is not a comment from her. No, this is a comment from her, my bad. Okay, so she says, part of the problem is the influence is unconscious. People don't recognize it, she added, and will often deny it. And I think that's true. I think that like subconsciously, there are certain things that influence our decisions. And it doesn't mean that these are bad people. It just means that the way this system is working is actually failing the American people, giving us inaccurate information at times. And so if we can fix the system and how the funding works, I think we'll get better information and less of that subconscious bias that's informing the dietary guidelines. So, yeah, any final thoughts on it?
I just feel like we've been eating these foods for so long. Like, shouldn't we know by now if they're healthy or not? Like eggs, and that's been around forever.
I know. And I mean, also, how are the eggs produced? You know, what are the chickens eating? Like, does that have an impact on whether or not the egg is healthy? Like, there's a lot that goes into this, and it can get complicated and overwhelming. And so I feel for Americans who are frustrated by this. I'm frustrated by it. Kate, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just unfortunately, like I totally hear you and I agree with you on the federal funding of the research. I think that would make a huge difference. But like the other part of this that might be even worse, I don't know how to quantify it, but there's just like a very large revolving door with industry and positions in the government, as there is a revolving door with lawmakers and industry as well. So, you know, like we have people that were lobbyists for the corn syrup industry that were in very important policy roles under the Trump administration that were communicating regularly with their employers about the guidelines. So like there's more problems than just what we talked about originally. Unfortunately, there's other corruption that is maybe more sneaky and not as clear, but it's definitely a problem.
No, I totally agree with you. The revolving door is part of that corruption, you know? And it's, I mean, you see it with politicians who might lose re-election, but then they're working as lobbyists and making a ton of money doing it. And then, you know, sometimes they'll re-enter the political realm. So you are seeing a little bit of that as well when it comes to the board members for these federal food guidelines. But you know, always be skeptical of information that's presented to you. Look for second sources, second opinions. That can definitely help. Just understanding how the system works, whether it's the funding or the revolving door, I think arms you with enough information to be skeptical and seek out more information. And obviously, if you're ever super, you know, confused about what is and isn't good for you, if you have the ability to do so, talk to a doctor. And typically they have better advice.